Yeah, we can go on right ahead. Please take the floor, Thing3. Thanks.
Okay. Hey everyone, I'm just getting ready here to share my screen. So if you'll bear with me for 1 second. All right. Everyone see the screen? All
Mine
right.
says stream pause, Danny, but
Yeah, mine says stream paused as well.
Let's see here. Okay. How about now?
Yep, all good now.
Okay. Cool. Hey, so my name's Danny Carpio. Thank you for putting this on. It's been great to listen to everyone. So just a quick intro about me and Thing3, and we can kind of dive in here. I'm by practice an attorney, by like academic specialty, constitutional law, and I started and managed a law firm for about a decade that I had stepped away from last year, though I'm still part of it, to go full-time crypto. I've been in the space just as a non-tech person since maybe 2018, but really more in earnest as DAO started popping up, just as a new model of coordinating. And so I was able to get on the founding team of Ready Player DAO, which is a gaming investment guild that's highly operational, and that posed a lot of issues as an operator. And so a lot of those issues kind of informed Thing3. I was able to kind of be part of a team that's on here with us to kind of spin up a services DAO called Thing3. So we're a services DAO composed of crypto literate professionals. Our like primary initial go-to-market group of professionals included one of the most like in-demand services, which are largely around regulatory compliance, taxes, structuring, and accounting. And so that's kind of our first and most developed core unit that goes to market and has been offering services to teams since around November of last year. We've also got specialists in accounting and like influencer contracts or anywhere really where crypto startups or Web3 startups and DAOs, anywhere where they just need to interface with the meat space. The reality is a lot of organizations, as they become operational or want to have mass adoption or have more consumer-facing products, they need to rely more and more on legacy infrastructure like the legal system. And so really we focus on being a bridge between those presences, and that's the market we try to serve. So one of the things that we've kind of realized since October, and this is something that I think we've just been working with teams. We don't want really a ton of inbounds. We really want to identify what is needed from professionals like us at scale. So one of the main issues we found facing Web 2 companies or startups that want to also incorporate Web 3 for themselves in their organizational structure is really that they don't understand anything. There's not enough people that know what is happening internally, and they don't know where to reach for a trusted resource to bridge over into Web3. So we have been serving those people, and a lot of times that's photographers, creators, brands, athletes, whatever. Anyone who's curious but just doesn't even know where to start. They generally need lawyers, and they need crypto native lawyers, and there's not enough. And so that's one demographic that we've been serving quite a bit. And the other one, probably more relevant here, is our Web3 native builders. So a lot of scaling pains that I've found and that I've realized from working with all the people we've been working with since October is that they're just major scaling pains that are tooling in nature, yes, but primarily, I think, for us, human in nature, very much like a social coordination issue, competency issue, I guess. So we, at Thing3, we just had to focus on first principles of how are we going to be able to distribute core specialized competency in the fields of structure, taxes, and regulatory compliance to the space in a way that we can do it. And so that's why we have this kind of pod structure where we just have highly specialized individuals come in and be able to provide their feedback in a way that they can actually do. And so making sure the contributor is capable of delivering the services at scale and coordinating them is something that we spent a lot of time doing. And so now we've been able to deliver that to Web3 native builders and try to help them scale and also avoid pitfalls that come when their models scale. So I can go into some examples here, but I don't want to just regurgitate here, but a lot of the issues that we have found do include contributor bandwidth, contributor competence, contributor organizational fit, recruitment, and lack of external support required for our organizations to thrive. And so what we really want to do is really be more modular and be able to be deployed into any DAO at any size and function as a core contributor to coordinate the point of execution within our specialty to free up time. Because I don't know about everyone else, but I do know that as DAO operators, we end up spending a lot of time on things that we shouldn't be. Those are, at scale, those are inefficiencies that make this model not superior to existing models, and our goal is to make the DAO easy to adopt for the masses. So that's how we've chosen to approach it. Some examples, I guess, from our learnings that have informed how we're currently doing things are with, I guess, 3 workflows that we've had over the last 8 months. And so I think one of the key issues and where we fit in most, and when I talk to services DAOs, I try to see what is that for them also, right? Is it seems like people need us to be able to coordinate custom implementations with their core teams, right? And so we're talking about complex problems requiring specialized solutions from crypto native professionals for implementation. So that takes some time, and it's maybe people don't realize they need it, but once we start talking to them, it just becomes apparent that there's an additional agreement layer or need to access the legal system or comply with it that is required by their model to be widely adopted, because people still rely on protections from the legal system, especially people who spend a lot of money. So I think I'll take some time here to take a break, introduce GV, let him introduce himself, and maybe he can talk about some of the things that we've learned and ended up doing as we plug into some builders teams.
Thanks, Danny. Hi, everyone. I'm GV. As a little background on me, I've been a corporate transactional attorney for about 8.5, 9 years now. I worked in big law. I've worked in-house, done tons of different transactions from entity and structuring to mergers and acquisitions to venture and private equity financing to commercial agreements. So I had a pretty good Web 2 base knowledge of all the sorts of transactions that we can go through. And so for the last about 1.5 years now, I've been working with Web3 startups and helping them kind of navigate the legal structuring and capital formation sort of questions that they have. And as you'll see is kind of a theme as I talk through things, I think there's a lot of benefit right now to availing ourselves of certain Web 2 legal structures that still could be applicable while the Web 3 legal landscape is still being built out. So I'm just going to kind of walk through how we've guided some of these Web 3 startups that we've worked with, as Danny mentioned, and kind of the considerations that we've gone through and how we've helped them identify and let them focus on building while we can kind of take care of the structuring and the capital formation sort of concerns. So as Danny sort of mentioned, the main pain point of service DAOs is getting all the legal and tax and accounting stuff in place so that they can go out and focus on building. So where service DAOs and where Thing3 comes in is to make those concepts as easy and accessible as possible. So in terms of structuring, the Web3 DAO legal landscape is still very much in development. And I know you'll hear that from a lot of lawyers on the tax and the legal and compliance side, that a lot of things are still being developed, but that's just the reality of the situation. There are certain structures like DAO LLCs, which just started in Wyoming, and certain new structures that are starting to pop up. But a lot of these newer structures that are trying to become applicable to DAO and Web3 native companies still don't have a lot of case law behind them, still don't have very much differentiation from the traditional Web2 legal models. So there's a choice to be made whether to go with some of these new structures or avail yourself of a more traditional, at least front-end structure that can provide you comfort in certain areas. So when we advise these startups, we really, the first step is to think about whether progressive decentralization is maybe a better approach to get more comfortable at the beginning. So when I say progressive decentralization, I'm basically just saying, let's look at these Web2 legal structures, such as corporations, such as LLCs, such as series LLCs that have been used for a long time, where there's a lot of clarity on the baseline for legal and compliance and operations, and there's limited liability, and seeing whether those types of legacy structures have a place in the new DAO Web3 era. So as we look through these and we look at really what the benefit of those structures is, we look at certain things. So we want to look at a Web3 startup or a service DAO and see what's their purpose, right? Are they going to invest in other DAOs? What are their long-term goals? Are they going to create a product? What stage are they currently in? Is it just a few founders who are really starting this DAO up? Do they have a more fulsome DAO already? And really also look at what their long-term goals in terms of funding and the timing and frequency and number of investors are. So we can look at all those different things. And Danny, if you could hop to the next slide too. We can look at all those different things and really make a determination on what the best progressive decentralization roadmap looks like. So in most of these situations, we find that using a legal wrapper from the Web2 legacy legal entity structure really could be very helpful at a starting point. The main benefits of those, like I kind of spoke to, are they provide limited liability, they have limited fiduciary obligations for the founders and members, there's a clear and publicly known baseline for legal compliance and operations, such as allowing you to get an EIN, allowing you to get bank accounts, and there's easy and well-known ways to acquire funding that are both going to be familiar to traditional as well as newer investors as well. So those same sort of considerations in terms of finding the correct legal wrapper can apply to contributors as well if they want to work through a wrapper as opposed to individually, and can also help them provide that extra layer of liability coverage. So I talked through some factors about determining what a proper legal wrapper is, but things that we've seen, right? You can use a traditional corporation. It's oftentimes the easiest way to initially set up a project that wants to bring in funds quickly. There's very, very easy traditional ways, like through a SAFE, which is a simple agreement for future equity, that allow you to use a combination of paper equity plus something in the form of potentially a token warrant and get investors all aligned in the correct way. There's also, as everyone knows, a traditional LLC option. That could be a better option if there's a limited number of initial members, but generally an LLC will require more building out of governance and distribution provisions initially than a corporation would. So say if you only have a few members of the DAO initially, an LLC may be the correct approach in order to ensure that everyone has equal governance rights, but where you're really just trying to get off the ground and get funding in, it may be more easy to do that through a corporation. Another structure that we've used for certain entities is a series LLC. So what happens there is where if a service DAO is working on a project by project or investment by investment basis where they have different contributors contributing to each different project, a series LLC allows you to bifurcate each of those projects or investments and put them in a separate sort of membership protocol, right? So different people who are contributing to those particular projects are able to benefit from the fruits of those projects and not other projects where they didn't contribute. So we see a lot of different structures that are available to be used right now. There's always opportunities to change structures down the road, but it's really important just to be thinking about the goals of the organization, who's going to be involved, how you see the members being expanded, and really appropriate times for funding in order to make sure that you have an appropriate structure at the beginning. But as I mentioned before, using a Web 2 legacy structure is now the best way, at least on the front end initially, to get that stuff put away, and then you have more certainty on a lot of different concepts. So after we do get through the formation portion with these Web3 startups we're working through, the next step is kind of getting them through funding. Although funding is important, the goals should be oftentimes to make it as quick and easy as possible, just because it takes these founders away from their ultimate goal, which is to start building. So the way we've seen funding being used traditionally with these new Web3 and DAOs is some sort of paper equity component that goes back into the legal entity wrapper along with the future token equity component. So they usually come in the form of warrants that track the investor's pro rata holding of paper equity. So that allows for certainty on the investor side in terms of equity in the legal wrapper, along with the upside in the form of the token warrant for any future token events. So as I kind of mentioned earlier, there are very familiar ways to do these fundings in both the corporation as well as the LLC models. So these are easy ways to help these new service DAOs get the money in quickly in a way where an investors will likely not have too many questions, or there'll be forms that they're familiar with. So that's kind of what we've recommended and used these service DAOs that we work with as a way to really get from formation all the way through funding in a short period of time and get to what's important, which is building. So
yeah, and GB, if I can just step in here for a little, I guess some context here, and maybe like what does this mean for a listener, right? As you're starting your stuff, because there's just so much information, right? The main pain point really is, I think, is the implementation or the custom implementation. Everything that we're doing in this space is globally distributed with completely different teams, and so before the raise and when we're talking to these teams, you know, a lot of the stuff that Colton and I forget prior presenter's name, a lot of that stuff really comes up in our conversations. We're so far down in the stack. It really comes down to traditional organizing, right? The DAO, I feel like really there's a gap in people focusing on the O. We've been organizing for thousands of years. And so a lot of those things they mentioned, we end up talking with those teams a lot. And so that really is like, what are you actually doing? What's your product market fit? Curating the founding core teams, assessing risk to the founders, contributors, community, and end users, and then modeling around that with best practices in and out of crypto to make sure that you're optimized for execution and scale. These are just custom issues that everyone is facing and everyone has faced with organizations. So I think from a takeaway for any non-legal folks to maybe demystify or make it easier is really just, we're starting organizations. Everyone's starting an organization. We're humans coordinating together. And the DAO is a form of doing that. And so I think focusing on the O and how Services DAO can help people focus on the O, it makes a lot of sense from maybe like a mental model for builders, but also as to our approach, because then the autonomy and the decentralization scales into the custom implementation. So I just wanted to kind of put that in there in case that helps. And GV, you can take over again.
No, that's totally right. That whole road mapping of what the community is going to look like is how service DAOs can help others custom fit a solution, right? There's not one solution is going to be the same for everyone. And so really building that stuff out and thinking about it, everything on the front end is how we can find the legal structures and the formations that work to best get to those goals. But yeah, that's kind of what we have on structuring and formation, and use, like I said, using those legacy Web 2 entities where will help avail these DAOs of traditional protections. I think it's an important thing to consider, and it's something that we've been doing with a lot of the startups we've been working with. So with that, I think I can pass off to our friendly tax panda, who can go through some of the tax considerations that we've seen.
Thanks, GB. Hey everyone, GM, Tax Panda here. I am like GV and Danny. I am an attorney. I'm an attorney in the U.S. and I have traditionally practice like tax law I work for an accounting firm. I have for about 9 years doing cross-border M&A and like transactional consulting and tax policy work, and started sort of working in the Web3 space, blockchain technology, dealing with cryptocurrency for about 2 years. And, it kind of happened by accident. Again, I'm not a developer. I'm not like I didn't grow up, really learning the kinds of things you need to create in this space the way that people, talk about creating in this space the way that most people here do. But I had tax, and that was my thing. And once I started to get really interested and go down the rabbit hole with crypto and like the amazing things that people are creating and doing with blockchain technology and with other folks in the space, I saw an opportunity for kind of to bring my knowledge to that and give people information about taxes, something that no one wants to think about, for sure. I mean, I'm the only person. If we were in a room and I said, raise your hand if like you want to talk about taxes and think about that, I imagine I would be the only person with my hand raised, and that's okay. But it's complicated. It's a complicated topic. Nobody wants to deal with it. Everyone has to, but it doesn't have to be like a pull your hair out, or it doesn't have to be a problem. There's simple solutions, and it sort of starts with understanding just basics about what you're dealing with when the question about tax comes up. And so, just from the very beginning, right? To find harmony between taxes and Web3, you have to. There's very basic questions you have to, or considerations you have to think about. And like, I'm a U.S. tax attorney. My tax knowledge base is almost exclusively like U.S. tax laws, and every country, although taxation generally worldwide has very similar aspects to it. The rules are different, and that's true, historically in traditional business. That's not just something that's happening right now because cryptocurrency is taking off as like an alternative asset, and people are building in Web3. The tax laws are different, and so what tax law applies to you can depend, on your circumstances, on your residence, like where you're a resident for tax purposes, what country you live in, or where you're doing business, or where, if you do end up, like GV was talking about, wrapping your DAO in a legal entity, because that's just sort of, in order to build relationships from a legal perspective in the real world, you have to almost required that you have a legal entity so that those relationships can happen. And so the taxation is going to depend on all those different considerations. Understanding what jurisdictions you're subject to tax to is an important first step. And also understanding that from a DAO perspective, you're a piece in the bigger organization, right? But as a contributor, your interests aren't always perfectly aligned, so you can't necessarily, especially from a U.S. perspective. But I think this definitely applies more generally. You can't just assume that whatever tax issues or tax considerations you have to take into account, you can just do that on your own, or that the DAO itself is going to take care of that, or that it's just not a problem. I mean, as countries and their taxing authorities start to write more laws about how to treat cryptocurrency, what to do about all the different ways that people are engaging with each other, starting businesses, and the types of businesses that the tax codes were just not designed to, or originally to cover. I mean, it's going to be important that that people, creators, everybody understands at least a little bit, what's going on from a tax perspective based on their activities. And one thing that people sort of, when they ask about what kinds of tax implications, or when they have tax questions and they ask like, what does this mean for me from a tax perspective, or for my organization from a tax perspective? It's the most important thing is working with a tax advisor, like a tax professional that understands the tax law in the country that you are dealing with. And that, so, some people say like, oh, I have been trying. Tax professionals that I've talked to have just been throwing their hands up in the air and going, I don't understand what this is. I don't know why everyone is just trading like JPEGs on the internet. I don't want to know, and there's no way that you're going to be able to explain to me anything that's going to get me, comfortable with giving you tax advice, because I just don't understand. It's understandable, and it's like a huge pain point for people that I've talked to, just not being able to find the help and the advice that they need from the people that have the tax knowledge. And one way, to sort of combat that is to make sure that, so most tax professionals, right, there's not a lot. There are some parts of tax laws that are like very, very specific to certain activities, certain businesses, and that stuff is important to know, right? But there's all that a tax professional really needs to know, and all they need from their clients, whether it's you as an individual or your organization, your group, is to have an understanding about the facts and circumstances surrounding what you're doing, what you're building, and who the stakeholders are and who's involved. There's not there's not a lot of law, especially in the United States right now, although there are definitely folks in the government who are pushing towards creating laws that are aimed directly at transactions involving cryptocurrency and things that will affect people building the Web3. The fact of the matter is that there's not really a law at the moment that's like specifically designed for the things that affect our day-to-day operations. And so if you can just try to explain to a tax professional, what it is you're doing, and give them the right facts that they need, they'll be able to apply the law that exists and come up with, some kind of way to get comfortable with whatever position that you're taking from a tax perspective. So it can't be stressed enough that like finding a tax professional to work with and making sure that relationship is there and that they have all the information they need is just vital if we're going to be trying to stay compliant with taxes. And again, that's like sort of jurisdiction agnostic, right? I mean, with the lack of law that exists, it's important, I think personally, that we try our best as like a Web3 community to stay compliant and have the show the governments that we're trying to comply with like whatever taxing authority is, or whatever the tax law is, even though there isn't law, just so that there's a sense, this sort of prove the theory that it's better to sort of encourage compliance and incentivize compliance rather than punish non-compliance. So just stepping down from my soapbox for a minute, we'll talk about some of the considerations for individuals and contributors. Again, one of the downsides of being early, right, is that there's just such a lack of guidance right now from taxing authorities on a global level. In the past, I mean, this year definitely there have been a lot more initiatives to bring current law and current regulation in line, not just from a tax perspective, but all over the gamut of law generally, to bring everything sort of in line with how fast this industry and this space is moving. but that's part of the problem and part of the issue that a lot of tax professionals are running into. Even so-called crypto native tax professionals, is that there's just not a clear answer right now. We don't know what the answer is. There's no 100%, right? All we have is existing law, what we're being told about what's going on, and working together to get comfortable that we're taking a position that's like consistent with what the tax law generally is trying to do. And so to do that, to from a base level to get there, it's so important to keep track of just data, and not just from being able to point to provide someone a wallet address and then have them go on like Etherscan and look at your on-chain transactions. I mean, I think with the complexity of what's going on with transactions on chain, it's almost it's becoming very, very difficult to just be able to look at on-chain data and say like the amounts that are being transferred and say like, okay, yeah, this is like in and out is just not like the questions aren't that easy anymore. But having the information ready for a tax advisor or like a tax preparer, being able to point to something that may if they're just looking at on-chain data and saying there's a discrepancy here, I don't really understand what this is, like just to be able to explain like, oh, okay, this was related to some transaction, and if you can get them comfortable, then they'll be more willing to back an approach or a position that you're taking on your tax return. And there's a lot of software. There's a lot of companies that have come out with like tax preparation software that also don't just apply for U.S. tax, but that cover a lot of different jurisdictions, and they're getting a lot better. But the fact of the matter is it's not quite where it should be for like to be compliant, right? There's a lot that individually we have to do to fill in a lot of the gaps, and you'll save a lot of time at the end of the year or whenever it is that you're figuring out what your how to file your tax returns and what tax you owe, if that information is just taken into account like quickly or as like in real time. It'll save a bunch of time in the end. And then considerations for DAOs. Right now, as much as we talk to folks about wrapping their DAOs and legal entities and how that's important from a legal liability perspective, and can just like create a bunch of opportunities from the necessity of dealing with the real world. There's a lot of information right now that's just floating around, and it's great, right? I mean, people are trying to bring information about law and tax to the community, that may not have ever had to deal with these kinds of issues before, or just, don't want to really take the time because it's boring to try to figure it out. And that's great. But there's a lot of information floating around right now on the internet about specific use cases and specific jurisdictions where, certain legal organization or entity structures make sense, and why that's like a good idea for a DAO in that particular case. But it's important just to remember that there is no one-size-fits-all answer for how to wrap your legal entity. There are good answers, and there may be multiple good answers, but I would really, really strongly advise working with someone to understand your own specific situation, right? To determine whether a specific jurisdiction or a type of legal entity or legal entity organization is the right one for you, and not just to like take a paper that was published on the internet and just use that and run with it. I mean, you'll be saving a lot of heartache in the future potentially by doing a little bit of the work up front. Especially, again, this question about taxation is so fact specific. The U.S. the U.S. tax laws, again, it's like it's very complicated. It's almost designed so that people can't navigate it. That's what it feels like sometimes. But there are a lot of rules that, you know, will deem certain things to happen, certain transactions to occur that didn't really occur economically, or deem entities or relationships to exist that where there is no legal relationship. Like, you know, I'm sure that everyone is familiar at this point with like a partnership being able to be formed between people who are working together, you know, even though there's not like a legal entity in place or an actual, like even a legal agreement in place necessarily. But, you know, for U.S. tax purposes, you can still have something that the U.S. sees and goes, yep, we're gonna apply our tax laws to this and treat you a certain way. And then one other thing that's important from an organizational perspective is that once an organization is sort of caught in the U.S. tax net or like a tax net, right? The law doesn't really care necessarily that you are a startup or, you know, a wildly successful corporate entity. The compliance, the information reporting requirements, all that stuff that nobody wants to deal with, that applies, right? And so understanding what those, like what that's going to be up front can also just alleviate a lot of potential problems in the future, and not just from the perspective of having to go back and actually do all that compliance and get back into compliance, but also, you know, penalties and fines. I mean, these things, once the law catches up to where the space is now, I mean, arguably it never will because we're moving too quickly and laws are drafted and regulations are come up with just so incredibly slowly. But, you know, as government regulatory bodies and administrative agencies put new rules together and try to cast their net wide enough to catch as much, you know, Web3 space activity as possible, there's going to be a lot of compliance that goes into that. And so having an understanding, working with someone who knows what the compliance aspects are and how to you know, approach them will help. It'll help on a day-to-day level. Having the information will help with just making day-to-day decisions, and you know, having those conversations sooner rather than later. You know, I can't stress how important. I can't stress enough how important that is. And with that, I will turn it back over to Annie, I think.
Yeah. Thanks, Tax Panda. So I think like bringing it back to more like what does this mean for us? You know, obviously, you know, I'm not a specialist there. Most of us aren't. But practically speaking, from like our learnings here at Thing3 and just more generally operating in DAO, is that we're leaving the space of like DeFi and we're engaging with the meat space. We have people who are conducting business in countries we live in, and those are jurisdictions we have to deal with. And failing to address those risks poses major risk to our organizations. You know, the risks that we don't appreciate or understand are the most dangerous ones. And large organizations address those. And so helping DAOs do that from our end, and also as founders or builders, wherever we are, thinking about those things and how you can address them, I think is kind of mission critical to long-term success as an organization or a business. You know, and another one is really just risk of execution. You know, organizational risk to being unable to do the thing that you say you do. And so this is very custom and at best by example. So, you know, at Ready Player DAO, where I roll around a lot in gaming, we are building and have been building a media content arm. We're signing an influencer, right, a gaming influencer to stream with us. And we have to interact with the meat space, his agent, and him. And we have to be able to forward face as a professional organization, understand contracts, and be able to execute them so that they'll work with us. And we would look illegitimate and incapable of doing it and lose business. if we weren't able to do that. So Thing3, we have an influencer, an attorney who has worked with athletes and influencers for a decade, right, and understands crypto. For photographers, we're working with the folks doing some really cool stuff. They had a global media partnership they needed to negotiate a contract with. Again, same thing. Being forward-facing, understanding your own risk to be able to navigate agreements with large enterprises, right, to be able to accomplish our goals as organizations. Those are critical, right? And the attorneys they used didn't understand anything. And what they needed was an attorney who understands what's happening, that can properly define the terms of the agreement. And so I think, like, as builders or as people who provide services to anyone in this space, it's helpful to think about those things ahead of time and address them so that we can succeed in what we're doing. I think we're a little over time. Larry is sick, very sick. He's here providing emotional support, but he's got some thoughts here on the token. I think we can drop this presentation though in the general, and anyone in here can feel free to ping us if you want to talk more about that with us. So I think I'll kind of yield here and get into the Q&A if there's anything.
Well, I'll just, before we move on, just this real quick, one thing, part of the conversation we have with a lot of the folks that we work with is about, their token, tokenizing, and I think people are starting to get a little bit more, they're starting to know more about like the risks associated with tokens and like, is it a security and that whole thing. But one thing I just like, if you're talking to or if you're working with someone who is like a tax professional or like a lawyer or something, right? Like one thing that I've noticed that people are saying is like, oh yeah, when they're describing their token, it's like, oh well, yeah, it has utility, so it's not a security. And one of the things like that we do when we work with people is we try to get people to elaborate on that. It's important. Like you can't just like saying something that has utility doesn't give it utility, I guess, is like what the point is. And to the extent that you can really have the conversation about like what the utility is, these are things that it sounds like simple, but we talk about it and we get like the people that we work with to really think about it, and having the conversation and thinking about it out loud with the people who understand what the laws are can be very beneficial when you're talking about like what the utility actually is for a token. That was it. I guess now we can, if anybody has any questions.
Okay, thank you, Danny, Tax Panda, and GV. Does Larry want to... Oh, the stream is over. Okay, cool. I thought he wanted to just make a brief presentation for his turn. Okay, thank you. We're still hanging in here. Awesome. So do we have any Q&A, any comments, questions, clarifications? Okay, if there are no questions, we would like to bring this particular session to a close. However, the next talk is supposed to take off by the next few minutes. Okay, thank you so much, the team from Thing3, Danny C, GV, Larry Flory, and Tax Panda. Thank you for, especially Tax Panda, for the insight on how we are still new in the space, and as such, there's really nothing much we can do other than watch and wait. Okay, so I will stop recording at this point. Thank you.